All right, we are recording. I'm going to share my screen. Does it work? It never seems to work the first time. Great. Infinite loop. And we're here. All right, so yesterday we left off on, or not yesterday, a couple days ago now, we left off about photosynthesis and cell respiration, right? So we left off talking about kind of carbon cycling here, which we'll come back to a little bit when we get back to ecology, but we're going to skip forward and talk about body systems. So today we are going to do anatomy, so body systems, ecology, quick review, because we just did that, although I have a bunch of slides on it, and then final stuff with like reading graphs and stuff like that. So it'll take the hour, as it always does. Oh, infinite loop. All right. So let me know if you have questions along the way. All right. You can just stop me at any time to ask questions. I don't mind. All right, so here are the different body systems that we had talked about in, in some level. So let's just remind you, the cardiovascular, we didn't call it that. This is just combining both. If you could turn off your mics. I just heard someone, which is fine, but only turn it on if you're asking questions. All right, so cardiovascular system, this is combining like the respiratory system and the circulatory system with the heart. So this is, and also the digestive system here. So it's kind of the pump that transports everything through the body. So the primary function here is going to be nutrient and gas transport, and it relies on the respiratory system for oxygen loading, right? We'll get into that a little bit. The respiratory system specifically is where the gas exchange occurs, getting oxygen into the body, and something that it relies on here. All right, so in this last section, we have key interdependence example. It is completely dependent on the muscular system. You may not think of it that way, but you need your muscles of your diaphragm to inflate your lungs, to bring in oxygen into the body. Your lungs don't inflate themselves. Your lungs are not muscles. They're just bags of air, basically. So what happens is your diaphragm pulls down and creates a vacuum, which expands your lungs and pulls oxygen into them. Right, so we'll go through a little bit of the anatomy of the lungs to talk about gas exchange today. Right, we talked about the nervous system for control and communication. Right, so this includes your brain, your central nervous system, your peripheral nervous system, and this is a really quick way that your body communicates. Right, and it regulates your heart rate, so how fast your heart is pumping in your cardiovascular system. Okay. Your musculoskeletal system, all right, so they're often put together because you cannot move your body without your muscles attached to your bones, right? So your muscles are what contracts, but it contracts to pull your bones, right? So movement and support, and your musculoskeletal system work hand in hand with the nervous signaling that triggers contractions, okay? The digestive system, all right, so bringing the nutrients we need, or sorry, the primary function of the digestive system is, of course, nutrient breakdown, right? So whatever you have or will eat for dinner needs to be broken down into super, super small parts. So I had like a chicken, Greek chicken wrap kind of thing. So chicken is a protein. It needs to be digested down to amino acids. The wrap is a carbohydrate. It needs to be broken down into glucose, and then we had like cheese and stuff on it as well, which are fats, which also need to be broken down, right? So that's your digestive system, and this relies on and works with the cardiovascular system of your like your veins and arteries that transport the absorbed materials into the bloodstream, or it absorbs into the bloodstream and then transports it throughout the body. All right, next. Right. Next here is the endocrine system. So the endocrine system regulates your hormones, right? So hormone regulation. Remember that hormones are also for signaling and making the cell do things, but this one's a much slower process as compared to the nervous system, right? So you have different nodes on your body, lymph nodes and stuff like that. Also in your brain, the pituitary gland, the adrenal gland, and other glands that release hormones into your bloodstream, and they are taken in, or maybe I should have had I'll create a slide for this one too, the endocrine system, because I don't think I have one. But it relies on your bloodstream to carry the hormones to where they need to go. Right, and then the last one that we talked quite a lot about is the excretory system. So here it's being called the urinary system because it regulates your urine, but it's waste filtration and also water balance. Okay. All right, so getting into it a little bit more. That was quite the wordy introduction. All right, but here's kind of where the important stuff comes in. All right, so gas exchange. Gas exchange is a big thing that happens in your body because we need oxygen for cellular respiration. So all of your cells need to receive that oxygen that's taken in from the atmosphere every second, all of the time, from the day you are born into this world until the day you die. You need to be breathing oxygen in to supply that oxygen to the cells to perform cellular respiration so that we can make ATP, especially your muscle cells, which need lots and lots of energy. So they have lots and lots of mitochondria, which means they need lots and lots of oxygen, right? So how do we get oxygen into the body? And that is through your respiratory system, okay? So you breathe in either through your nose or your mouth. It enters your throat, your trachea goes down the bronchi, and that will split into smaller and smaller kind of branches like a tree. So it's the bronchi and then bronchioli until we reach the alveoli, which is the air sacs where the actual gas exchange occurs. All right, so here we have these alveoli, and they are intertwined with the circulatory system. All right, so we have arteries and veins with capillary beds. Right, so the capillary beds are surrounding the alveoli. Okay, so inside the alveoli, it'll fill up with oxygen, right? Here. All right, so it'll fill up with oxygen, right? And then that oxygen will diffuse into the red blood cells inside of the circulatory system, right? Oxygenating the red blood cells, and then that blood filters or goes back to the heart and gets pumped to the body, right? At the body, that oxygen is dropped off, right? And carbon dioxide is picked up, which is the byproduct of cell respiration, right? That carbon dioxide gets brought back to the lungs to breathe out, all right? And that's when the gas exchange occurs again in a loop continuously. All right. Let's see, the respiratory system harvests oxygen while the circulatory system serves as a conveyor belt. Without the heart's pressure, oxygen cannot reach mitochondria for cell respiration. And again, because you absolutely have to know this equation, cell respiration requires glucose and oxygen to enter into the cells, go to the mitochondria, perform cellular respiration, and what comes out is carbon dioxide and water as byproducts. And then the goal of this whole process is to create this energy, the ATP. All right. Like I was saying before, cells like muscle cells that need tons and tons of energy have lots and lots of mitochondria, which means that they need a lot of oxygen and glucose being transported to these muscle cells all of the time. All right. If oxygen is not available to the muscle cells, then you start going through lactic acid fermentation. And that's when you really get like the burning sensation in your muscles, which is your body telling you basically to slow down and take a breath and replenish the oxygen in your replenish the oxygen so that you can start going through cell respiration again, because aerobic cellular respiration with oxygen nets you like 36 to 38 ATP molecules per glucose. right? Whereas lactic acid fermentation only nets you only get 2 ATPs per glucose molecule. So it's super inefficient. You're going to feel a lot of fatigue, and you're not going to feel good. So your body really wants to slow down at that point and replenish the oxygen. All right. So at that point, your heart rate is increasing, your breathing rate is deepening and increasing to maximize oxygen intake and absorption into the blood and get it to the cells as fast as possible. Infinite loop. Anybody needs to go in? All right. All right. All right, the next thing that we were just talking about is glucose. All right, so you absolutely need glucose, right? You need sugar to perform cellular respiration. So there are, I say you need sugar, but there are other ways to make glucose, but ultimately your body needs glucose to perform cellular respiration, and that is coming from your diet. All right, so you eat, you mechanically digest your food by chewing, increasing the surface area of the food so that the enzymes in your saliva can reach all of the bits of food and start breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces. You swallow that food, it reaches your stomach. There's tons of acids and enzymes in your stomach that are breaking down that food even further. Then it gets dropped into your small intestine. And then in your small intestine, there's a little bit more digestion that occurs with bile coming from your gallbladder and other enzymes from your liver and pancreas. And then once it is all digested in the really early parts of your small intestine, it starts getting absorbed. And it gets absorbed in these structures called villi. All right, so it's these finger-like projections that line your intestines. All right, so mainly your small intestine. There's, hundreds of thousands of these finger-like projections all along your small intestine, and they are maximized for nutrient absorption. All right, so at this point, you have all of your food being broken down into its smallest pieces. So all of your proteins are broken down into amino acids, all of your carbohydrates are broken down into monosaccharides like glucose, all of the lipids are broken down into their smallest pieces, and they start getting absorbed through the walls of these villi into the circulatory system. So again, we have these villi with capillary beds projecting into the villi so that we can get absorption through this one cell thick layer, right? So right here, these villi are just one cell thick, so we can get really easy absorption of nutrients into the circulatory system, right? Then that gets brought to all of the cells that need it. Okay. So we have villi, right? Microscopic projections in the small intestine that allow for nutrients to enter the bloodstream. That's kind of the most important part of this nutrient absorption because the structure of these villi, right? So it's really maximizing the surface area that we can absorb nutrients into the capillary beds here that are projecting into the villi. Right. The circulatory system directs nutrients to the liver for processing. It's not too important here, but it is mutually dependent. The digestion is mutually dependent on the circulatory system. Right. So following this interdependence here, the digestive tract muscles require ATP from the circulatory system to power the movement of food through the digestive system as well. All right, so it's kind of it all works together is kind of what I'm getting at here, is that all of your body systems have to work together in order to keep you going. All right, so you have to breathe in oxygen in your respiratory system. You have to digest food in your digestive system. You got to get that glucose and get that oxygen to your cells through your circulatory system. And then within the cells, we perform cell respiration, and then we kick out all the waste products that get delivered to where they need to go. All right. The structure of both the alveoli and the villi, and as well microvilli, but I wouldn't worry about that. It's just even smaller projections, the structure of them are maximized for diffusion. All right, so this is where we talked a lot about structure meeting function, right? So the structure of these alveoli and the structure of the microvilli are perfectly made to serve the function of diffusing either oxygen or nutrients through the cells, right? So these alveoli are only one cell thick, and we have capillary beds that are intertwined around each one of these air sacs. So we get super easy diffusion of oxygen from high concentration inside the air sac to low concentration in the red blood cells, right? Same thing with the carbon dioxide when it needs to get dropped off. It's high in the blood, it's low in the air, in the alveoli, so it diffuses very, very quickly and very, very easily through this one cell to get into the alveoli, right? The same idea is happening here with the villi. They're just one cell thick, and we have the circulatory system right there. So there's a really high concentration of glucose in the digestive tract. It's going to get absorbed. This is a little bit more complicated, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. It gets absorbed really easily into the digestive system so that it can be brought to where it needs to go. Right, so don't forget about the concept of diffusion, where molecules are moving from high concentration to low concentration, and this does not take any energy, and it happens pretty quickly. All right, so let me just make sure we hit all the points. These are very well adapted to their function. There's a high surface area. Complex branching in your lungs maximizes the exchange. The more air sacs, so the more air sacs there are that are backed up to the circulatory system, the more oxygen can be diffused into the circulatory system, okay? They have super thin membranes, one cell thick, which can really maximize the rate of diffusion, right? And it helps to maintain concentration gradients. So we have this continuous transport, which helps to maintain the high gradient for movement. It says flux here, but that's kind of a froofy word. The flux just means the movement of the nutrients from the digestive system into the circulatory system, right? These adaptations optimize the passive movement of particles, right? Passive means it takes no energy, it's doing it on its own, it's the natural state of things, right? So this is building on the principles of diffusion and transport that we talked about in the first review session. Right. Moving forward to the excretory system, the excretory system, maintaining fluid balance and filtering out the blood, right? What gets filtered out of the blood ends up in your pee. So stuff like urea, which is a byproduct of protein synthesis, building proteins. It creates urea, which is toxic to your blood, so it needs to be filtered out, and that happens at the kidney, right? So the kidneys are your ultimate filters that are filtering out all of the waste from your blood and depositing it into your urine. And another job that they have is to help maintain water balance, right? So you really need to maintain water balance in your blood to make sure that you are properly hydrated at all times, right? So you need your blood to be isotonic to your red blood cells. Okay, so I am going to pull that up. Blood isotonic to. All right, so if you remember the concept of tonicity, it is telling us which way the water is going to flow. Okay, so if we have an isotonic solution, the concentration of molecules inside and outside of the cell, or the water balance inside and outside of the red blood cells, is equal. So there is this dynamic equilibrium of water moving in and out of the cells, and they're very happy in this way. All right, so your body is desperately trying to maintain an isotonic solution so that your red blood cells are happy, healthy. Okay, if you are super, super overhydrated and you are unable to rebalance those water levels, right? So you've probably noticed that if you drink a ton of water, you pee more, right? Because you don't want all of that water ending up in your blood diluting your blood and creating a hypotonic solution. Okay, so if you were unable to get rid of all of that water that you were drinking excessively in this scenario, they're going to flow into the red blood cells and potentially burst them open. So you can die from a, extreme chugging of water. Right? It has happened on live television before. I know I've told you guys that story. Likewise, you can dehydrate. Right? So if you go a very, very long period of time without drinking water, or you sweat a ton in the very hot sun, right? If you go for a long hike or something like that and you did not properly hydrate yourself, your blood can get super thick and sticky and dehydrated. And your body is going to pull the liquid that would have ended up in your urine back into your blood, all right? But the water has to be available in the first place. So if that happens for a long period of time, your blood becomes like super sticky and it starts to pull the water out of your red blood cells and they can kind of shrivel up, right? So to avoid these two extremes here, your kidney is working very hard to balance the water levels in your blood so to maintain this isotonic solution. All right, constant side quests. Right, so it does this through the nephron. Right, so the nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. There are millions and millions of these nephrons. They have this funky structure here, but again, its structure matches its function, right? So we have these tubings, right? So it's like plumbing, basically. Well, it's not like plumbing, but it looks like plumbing. And their circulatory system is wrapped around the tubing, or the ducts, I guess. I don't know, the nephron. You don't have to know each individual part of it, but the circulatory system is wrapped around the nephron, right? So we get diffusion of waste out of the blood into the nephron, right? And we also have time to balance the water in response to hormones, right? So your brain, your hypothalamus in your brain is constantly checking if your blood is the correct water balance, and if it is, if you are, for example, too dehydrated, there's not enough water in your blood, it's starting to get sticky, your hypothalamus will release or it will tell the pituitary gland in your brain to release antidiuretic hormone, which will travel through your blood and tell your kidney to hold on to water and not release it, right? So if you are very dehydrated, you don't go pee. Right? Because your brain is telling your body to hold on to that water as much as possible. All right. So let me just read this, make sure I hit all my points. The kidneys filter the entire blood volume dozens of times a day. This process regulates blood pressure in your circulatory system and also pH balance, right, which is a system-wide homeostasis. I'll touch on pH balance in a second here. Right, specialized nephrons utilize blood pressure to force waste product out of the plasma, which is in your blood, into the collecting ducts. Right, everything that is collected in the ducts gets sent to the ureter, and then you pee it out. Okay. Infinite loop. All right, just making sure. All right, the next thing I want to touch upon here is your nervous and your endocrine system a little bit, and how they integrate signals in order to maintain homeostasis. All right, so this is kind of a larger talking point here, because we need to maintain homeostasis, and your nervous system and your endocrine system are controlling everything. Right, it's controlling your heart rate, your breathing rate, your blood pressure, and your water levels, and all of your carbon dioxide and oxygen levels in your blood are all controlled by your nervous system and your endocrine system, right? So the nervous system is fast, super fast, right? So neurons, they completely bypass your circulatory system. You have your central nervous system down your center, like I was saying, and your peripheral nervous system. Your periphery is the outside, right? And they communicate super, super quickly. Think about how fast you pull your hand away from touching something that's hot. That signal is super, super quick to keep you safe. All right, so it's these fast, short duration, quick signals. It uses electrochemical impulses, right? So between inside the neuron, right? So for neurons to communicate, I'm not going to worry about too much of this, but these are two neurons that need to communicate signals to each other. So there are these super, super specialized cells that are just used for communication. Signals are transported through the neuron in electrical impulses, which are super, super quick. It's like electricity running through the neuron super quickly, and then they don't actually touch each other. Adjacent neurons that are next to each other, which is what adjacent means, next to each other, they don't touch each other. So between the neurons, they have to communicate with each other through these chemical signals called neurotransmitters, right? So there's these chemical signals that get dumped into the space between the neurons, that gets picked up by the next neuron and then transformed into another electrical signal. All right, so it's like electricity, chemical signal called neurotransmitters, and then electrical signal again, or electricity again. So it's super, super quick, right? Imagine how fast electricity turns on when you flip a switch, right? So once you flip the switch, your light turns on pretty much immediately. That signal, and it's like a far distance, right? That signal goes really, really quickly with this electrical impulse that's moving through these neurons, right? Anything else I want to say there? This is how your brain is communicating, right? So your brain is kind of just a bunch of these neurons that are communicating with each other through electrical impulse and these neurotransmitters. And they're all kind of interconnected, creating pathways, different pathways to communicate with each other. Right. Right. The endocrine system, however, still used for communication, still absolutely necessary, but it is slower, and the result is this longer signal, right? So if the nervous system is controlling like super fast impulses, like moving your hand, the endocrine system is more so controlling your like mood and stability and stuff like that, and more long-term changes in your body. All right, so these long-term signals are communicated from cell to cell using hormones. Right, they are released from a gland. There's glands all over your body, right? There's glands kind of in your brain, your pituitary gland. You have glands here, in your armpits, in your stomach, on your kidneys or the adrenal glands, and they will release hormones into the bloodstream. And the target cell has specific receptors on the cell membrane that can receive the signal, right? So much like enzymes, receptors have a specific shape that can communicate or can interact with the specific hormone that's being released, right? So antidiuretic hormone, like we just talked about, is going to be transported through the entire circulatory system, right? But only the kidney has the receptors in order to receive that signal and respond to that signal, right? So they are slower, longer duration signals using hormones released into the bloodstream to reach target cells, and that target cell needs to have a receptor in order to receive that communication. Right? Both systems coordinate the body's response in order to maintain dynamic equilibrium, right? That's this seesaw effect. So you want to keep your body at a general set point. This is the number that your body is happiest at. All right, so you have a set point for a lot of your, or most of your bodily, I don't know, physiologies. So temperature, for example, you have a set point for your temperature, 98.6 degrees, more or less. It doesn't have to be that exact number. That's just an average, right? So now you have that set point, and your body is always comparing the data in your body, right? So your brain, let me rephrase this. Your brain is always comparing the data in your body to the set point, right? So if your brain looks for the temperature and the temperature is 98.6, great. We don't have to do anything about it, right? If it starts to creep up a little bit, the temperature starts to creep up, maybe we don't have to do anything too drastic if it's like 99 degrees, but if now we've hit 101, 102 degrees Fahrenheit in your blood, your hypothalamus is going to say, oh no, we need to respond to this signal. Let's do something about it to cool off our body. Right? That's that dynamic equilibrium to try to bring it back down to that equal place. All right. So that homeostasis is what we normally call it. Right. It's not just temperature. Right. Your blood sugar works this way. We talked a lot about blood sugar and the use of insulin and glucagon in order to regulate your blood sugar. All right. Also pH. All right. So I want to touch upon pH a little bit right here because it's an interesting one. In order to regulate your breathing and your heart rate, your body is checking for, I keep saying your body, your hypothalamus is checking for the pH of your blood, right? It's kind of this indirect mechanism here where if you have a buildup of carbon dioxide, right? So if you have a buildup of carbon dioxide and a lower oxygen level, your blood becomes more acidic, right? Much like the environment, when there's carbon dioxide that gets dissolved into marine life waters, it becomes acidic, right? So does your blood. With carbon dioxide, your blood becomes acidic, right? That's a low pH and away from the set point, right? So if your blood pH drops, your body is going to increase your breathing rate to kick out that carbon dioxide and replace it with oxygen, and also your heart rate. So you're delivering that carbon dioxide back out to your lungs and picking up more oxygen. Right. All right, your nervous system and your endocrine system works together. There's nothing here that you need to memorize. I'm just trying to show you how interconnected they are. All right, so here is your brain, your hypothalamus, and your pituitary gland, and they're constantly communicating to release hormones into the blood. Here is, can I think of anything? Can I think of anything here? It's just a bunch of different hormones that we don't really need to talk about that get sent to specific parts of the body so that they can change. I'm just going to close my window for a second because I hear my son. All right. I was getting distracted by the kids in my backyard. All right. All right, so just talking about how the nervous system and the endocrine system are working together. Let's get back to that before my brain went haywire. All right, the nervous system provides high-speed electrical signals, while the endocrine system delivers long-duration chemical signals, which we call hormones. Right, the hypothalamus in your brain. All right, this is kind of the processing center in your brain, acts as this critical bridge. Right, translating the nervous system, the neural or nerve impulses into hormone release. And this will regulate all sorts of these more long-term physiologies like growth, for example. So you have human growth hormone that you need circulating in your blood in order to grow during, for example, like puberty and stuff like that. When you have a growth spurt, you create a lot of human growth hormone that circulates in your blood and reaches to all of the cells that needs it. And then your bones will literally grow, right? Your muscles will grow and your bones will grow and your digestive system will grow, right? So all of the cells in your body will start to divide and grow and make you bigger and bigger. Right? It also regulates your level of stress, right? So we talked about adrenaline and the adrenal glands that release like cortisol and adrenaline. They have a purpose, right? So chronic stress, obviously not good, but there is a benefit to these stress hormones if you need it, right? So historically, if you're being chased by a bear or whatever, or you need to chase you're hunting, you may need a shot of adrenaline to kick up your metabolism to get you going, right? That's all I really wanted to say there. If there is anything that they ask you about on the Regents, they're going to give you background. They're going to give you something that's going on in the human body, right? And they're going to tell you this hormone, right? If it's called the human growth hormone, then you should assume a couple things, right? So this hormone is used for growth. Hormones are used in the endocrine system, right? The endocrine system uses the circulatory system. They may give you something that you don't necessarily know about, but you have to link it to what you know, and then read the passage very carefully as to what they're telling you, because that's kind of how, right, the examples that we've done so far in the past Regents, they may give you a scenario that is quite specific about one particular animal, but about hormones, how they work. If it's telling you it's a growth hormone or something like that, or a puberty hormone, or then you got to link these things together. All right. The last thing I want to touch on with body systems is feedback loops. All right, so we talked a little bit about feedback loops before, but the most common feedback loop is called a negative feedback loop. Okay, so a negative feedback loop is when you are dampening a stimulus, right? So you are reducing the effect of some stimulus. And how do we do that? It's this feedback loop right here. So if you have a stimulus is anything that is going to stimulate a response in the body. And I know that's very general, but think like a rise in temperature. Heat can be a stimulus, right? So it stimulates your body to respond, okay? So any change in the environment can stimulate your body to respond. So for example, if it's very, very, very hot out, that's going to increase the temperature on your skin, all right? And what your body is going to do, it's going to do something to reduce the effect of that stimulus, the heat, right? You have sensors, right? So you have sensors, these nerve receptors that are all over your skin and all over your body that are detecting that change. Okay, so for example, temperature, you have temperature receptors all over your skin, and it's sensing that change in temperature and sending that signal to the brain. Right, so it's taking that information from the outside world and sending that signal to the brain, and the brain decide what's to do. Right, so that's the control portion of this. The hypothalamus in your brain, it's generally your hypothalamus is the control center, processes that information received from your sensors and then tells the body what to do. Right, it decides who's going to respond. Right, so there's this change in temperature, the stimulus. You have receptors that receive the signal of the stimulus, right? They receive that signal and send it to the hypothalamus, which is the control center, and the hypothalamus is going to tell the effector what to do, right? So in this example, the effector is going to be your sweat glands, right? So you are super, super hot. Your receptors in your skin receive that signal of heat, send it to your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus tells your sweat glands to turn on and to create sweat, right? And remember, sweat cools you off, not necessarily because there is water on your skin, but because the water evaporates off your skin, which absorbs the heat off of your skin, right? Another thing that could happen here is the blood vessels dilate. Right. We've talked a lot about feedback loops, so we could fit a lot of different feedback loops and homeostasis into these 4 steps here, but generally it follows these 4 steps. There's a stimulus, there's a sensor that can sense the stimulus. That sensor sends that signal to the control center, right? And the control center tells an effector what to do, right? And the effector is going to perform some tasks that will reduce the stimulus. All right. All right, we're going to switch gears. All right, so we're going to switch gears to the last thing that we've talked about in our curriculum, right? I'm just checking that I was still recording because it's happened multiple times that I've been kicked out. All right, so the last unit that we've talked about, and everybody did pretty well on the exam, so hopefully you guys really understood what we were talking about here. It's more, I think, straightforward than a lot of the other topics because it's stuff you can see and think about and kind of know if you look out into the world around you. So I think ecology is a lot more straightforward, but a lot of the other topics get brought into ecology. And you guys saw that when we did lots and lots of the examples that came from previous regencies, right? So hopefully you really took those examples to heart. All right, some of the topics that we talked about when it came to ecology was ecosystems, right? So we did this kind of hierarchy of ecosystems where you can have a individual, say like one fish, right? Or something like that, an individual. You can have a population, which is all of the individuals of the same species in one area. Okay, so that's the population. You can have a community. So the community is going to be all of the living things, all of the different populations in that area. And then you can have the ecosystem, which is all of the living and non-living. So biotic and abiotic factors in that area. All right, so this is going to account for all of the animals, the plant life, but also the water and the air, the temperature, the weather, stuff like that. And that is what the ecosystem is, right? And if we zoom out even further and look at all of the ecosystems of all of life, it's called the biosphere, right? So the biosphere is like all. All right, it happened. I got kicked out. All right, I'm back though. Hopefully, nothing. I knew it was going to happen eventually. All right, I'm back. A lot of emojis. All right, a very emotional John. Okay, it was bound to happen eventually. All right, let's get back to ecology. All right, allow share screen. Okay. All right, infinite loop every time. My goodness, we were doing so good. All right, ecosystems are these dynamic systems. All right, they're always changing, they're evolving like species do. Ecosystems evolve as well. And this is where all of the biotic and all of the abiotic, right? Bio is all of the life, and abiotic, all of the non-living factors interact with each other and determine the interactions in the environment, right? Interactions in that ecosystem. One of the important things that we talked about when it comes to ecosystems is the carrying capacity of the ecosystem. right? The carrying capacity is the limit of species that can be held infinitely or supported infinitely by an ecosystem, right? So it completely depends on all of the available resources and all of the different communities that are present in the ecosystem, right? If there is lots and lots of lush plant life and water and space available in and different niches available. All right, so niche is something I guess we'll talk about too. Available in this ecosystem, it has a really high carrying capacity and it could support lots and lots and lots of life. Right. However, if we don't, if we have competition for resources, competition for space and mates and food and water, and in niches and habitat. Habitat is where you live, and niche is the role you play in your environment. Then there is a cap of how many individuals can be supported by that ecosystem. And this is pretty much true for any population. There's going to be a carrying capacity in there in the ecosystem, right? There is not this infinite amount of resources that can support an infinite amount of individuals in the population, right? So early on in the growth of a population, it may look like the growth of the population may be increasing like exponentially in the beginning, growing and growing and growing, but it's going to reach a point where that growth plateaus, right? So it kind of falls off and creates this plateau. And that plateau is called the carrying capacity. That is the maximum number of individuals that ecosystem can indefinitely support, right? If you go past that carrying capacity, then there's going to be consequences like, competition for resources is going to cause like over consumption of the plants, all right, overgrazing, overeating the plants, and then there's going to be this greater lack of resources, and then the population is going to drop back down. So there's going to be this like forced fall of the population if you overshoot it. Right? We can describe an ecosystem by its biodiversity, right? A very, very healthy ecosystem is going to have high biodiversity, right? Biodiversity is the amount of different species that are present in the ecosystem. So lots of different plants and lots of different wildlife and even lots of different bacteria and fungi and algae and stuff like that. If you have more life, more biodiversity in an ecosystem, it is good for the ecosystem, right? It creates a resilient and stable ecosystem. This is because if something happens that plucks one of those species out, there's going to be overlap in the interactions that happen in those ecosystems. So if you just take out one of those plants, then everything else is still going to be okay. There's going to be enough plants to support the animals and the other things going on, the kind of production needs of the ecosystem. If there is a monoculture, right, so a monoculture is when there's just one culture, mono means one. If there's just one plant in this entire area, if something happens to that plant, then it's going to decimate the entire area, all right? So the more biodiversity that an ecosystem has, the more stable and the more resilient it's going to be. The next thing is trophic cascades, which is just going to bring me into trophic levels. All right, so we're going to skip right into this slide where we're talking about trophic levels. All right, so you can place organisms into different trophic levels by how they interact or their role that they have in the environment. All right, so at the bottom of this trophic pyramid, we have the primary producers. Producers produce all of the energy for the ecosystem. So anything that performs photosynthesis is going to be a producer because it produces its own glucose, it produces its own energy, and everything else above it relies on that energy, right? We rely on the food that we eat, and the animals that we eat rely on the food that they eat. So all the way down, we all rely on the primary producers, which itself, the primary producers rely on access to sunlight, right? So photosynthesis, right? So that's the base of the trophic levels, the trophic pyramid. And there's the most of them. Think about, look outside. How many Grass. How many grass? What a question, right? How many grass plants, I guess that's a weird way to say it, and trees and bushes and flowers are outside. There's tons of it. There's tons and tons of what we call biomass of these primary producers, because they are supporting the energy needs of everything else around them, right, in ecosystems. Next, we have primary consumers. The primary consumers are going to be herbivores. Right? So herbivores eat plants. The primary consumers, eat, are going to be the herbivores that eat the producers. Right? Then you have secondary consumers. These secondary consumers are going to eat the herbivores. Right? So these are carnivores. They're going to eat the herbivores. And, depending on what trophic pyramid we look at, there can be many different levels to it. All right, there's no defined amount of levels to these trophic pyramids. It's just whatever is in the food chain or food web here. Right, so we have the producers, we have the herbivores that are eating the plants, then we have these carnivores that are eating the herbivores. We may have another level of this, another level of carnivores eating these carnivores that are eating the herbivores that are eating the plants. And then at the very, very top, with no natural predators, we can have apex predators. These are the top of the food chain. These apex predators are at the very, very top, right? So for example, I can kind of just fit in a couple of animals here. We could have plant life at the bottom, and you might have mice eating the plants. And then you may have snakes eating the mice, and then maybe you'll have hawks eating the snakes, all right? And then the hawks probably don't have natural predators. I don't know, all right? So the hawks may be the top of the pyramid in this case. Right. One of the important rules to trophic levels is that only 10% of the energy actually makes it to the next level. Right. So I'm going to read this off. In most ecosystems, only about 10% of the energy available at one trophic level is transferred to the next trophic level, right? So if the primary producers are producing 100% of the energy for the ecosystem, only 10% makes it to the herbivores, right? So only 10% actually gets incorporated into the herbivores for its own use. That's because the 90% is used for its own use. Right, so grass grows, grass reproduces and grows and repairs itself and has its own metabolism. So it needs to use the energy that it makes in order to keep itself alive, right? And then only a certain amount of it actually makes it to the next level. Right, so the remaining 90% is lost as metabolism, and also some is lost as heat. Some is always lost as heat. Right. The producers are really limiting the kind of the size of the pyramid, right? So depending on how much producers you have performing photosynthesis is really going to establish the carrying capacity of the ecosystem, right? So to support a lot of mice, you need a lot more grass. To support a lot of snakes, you need tons more mice and even more grass underneath it, right? So it all kind of depends on the size of the base of the pyramid, right? This also helps to explain why there are so much less of animals as you go up trophic levels. I know I said that kind of weird. So it explains why top predators are rare, right? Because not all of the energy makes it to the next level. So if you have, 10,000 plants, you may have 1,000 mice, and you may have 100 snakes, and you may have 10 hawks. Okay. And this equation here, it's not like an equation you really have to know. It's just that only 10% of the previous energy, it makes it to the next level, right? So only 10% of the energy produced by the primary producers actually makes it to the primary consumers, right? As we move up the trophic levels, energy gets lost as heat. Energy always gets lost as heat. And then we also have this element of recycling. right? So we talked a little bit about carbon cycling. So this can kind of fit into here. We have decomposers that are breaking down the nutrients and the matter that are going to bring it back down to the initial level, right? So where energy is always is kind of flowing. Energy is always flowing into ecosystems, flowing in and flowing out. We have a constant input of solar energy into our ecosystems that are being harvested by the producers, all right, and just released as heat. We have this constant input. That's not true for matter. That's not true for carbon and hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. These are recycled through the ecosystem, and these recyclers are decomposers. All right, the decomposers recycle the nutrients back to the bottom of the trophic pyramid. All right, this is kind of that description of biomass, right? So this is what I was talking about with only 10% of the kind of weight, the biomass, makes it to the next level. So if we have, I literally just said this, so 10,000 plants, 1,000 herbivores could be mice, 100 primary carnivores, which could be snakes, and then 10 top predators, which could be hawks. Right. So there's going to be this drastic reduction in the amount of the next trophic level that can be supported because of this. Right. Food chains versus food webs. Right. Food chains are just a linear expression of energy moving in just like from plant to mice to snake to hawk, right? But things are more complicated than that. We want them to be more complicated than that. And what's more true to reality is these food webs, right? So food webs are more true, but they're more complex, and you're probably never going to get them completely accurate to the reality of the situation because of all of the overlap, right? So food webs represent the reality of nature. There are many animals. Many animals eat more than one type of food, all right? So there's going to be kind of arrows pointing in all different types of directions here, right? Which is good. So the more diversity that you have in the ecosystem, in the food web, the more stability, all right? So same thing with biodiversity here. It stands with food webs. The more biodiversity, the more different interactions you have in the ecosystem, the more stable that ecosystem is. If one prey species declines for whatever reason, consumers can switch to their other food source, preventing a total ecosystem collapse. Right? So more diverse, the better in all of these ecology topics. I know we're running a bit out of time, but I'm just going to keep going. So who can stay, right? We're going to the end of ecology here, right? Key roles in the web. I've already talked about this. So producers are the autotrophs that perform photosynthesis. Consumers are the heterotrophs that must ingest other organisms to obtain their energy, right? We also have the decomposers, which are recycling the matter back to the producers, right? There are different types of relationship based off of the way they interact with each other, the way the energy flows between the two interacting species. Isn't the best explanation, but you'll pick up what I'm putting down here. All right, so different types of symbiotic interactions. Symbiotic interactions are when two species interact very closely together. There can be mutualism, right? If you are mutually beneficial to each other, both species benefit from this interaction, right? So it's a plus plus, right? The energy is plus plus. Commensalism is one benefits and one is unaffected. All right, so one just like kind of doesn't care that much. So one benefits while the other is neither helped nor harmed. And then parasitism, so a parasite, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here. One benefits, one's harmed. It takes away energy from the other. So think like tick or worms or I don't know, stuff like that. Ticks is a really good example. Right. All right. All right. So population trends. When it talks about predator and prey, we went into this a lot more in the during the class, obviously, but it's something that may come up. So here we just have this very general graph of the prey population, right, and the predator population, right, over time, right, and the what is being shown here is that the predator peaks follow prey peaks with a slight delay, right? So if you have a increase in prey, right, which is going to be the food of the predator, right, you're going to have a following increase in the predator, right? If you have an increase in the predator, you're going to have a decrease in the prey, right? So it goes through these cycles. So we can have gazelle and lions. Is that a reasonable thing? I'm not totally sure. If you have more gazelle, that's going to sustain more lions. If you have more lions, they're going to eat the more gazelles. So it's going to go back down. And then maybe there's not as much gazelle, so the lions go back down. And it's just going to follow these cycles. Right. Human impact. Right. So I'm just going to keep going here. Go straight to the end. Human impact is what we finished off on, ecosystems under pressure, right? So there are certain things that we have contributed negatively as the human species to ecosystems. For example, introduction of invasive species, right? So this is putting a species of, say, bug or plant into a place where they weren't native to. So think the spotter and lanternflies that we talked about, and you have seen, and I still see them around my backyard sometimes, right? So they were like picked up and they were put in, I think food storage is how they got here. And they got to Long Island and then they had no natural predators here. So nobody knew what to do with them in the ecosystem. And they absolutely boomed in population like crazy. All of a sudden you saw like hundreds of thousands of them and they had no natural predators. So they did a lot of destruction on the ecosystem. They used up a lot of resources, a lot of space, destroyed a lot of our trees. So they did a lot of damage very quickly. Right? Climate change is something that we talked about with greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. As we burn fossil fuels and other things, it deposits a lot of carbon dioxide, right? As well as like deforestation and everything. Deposits a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, right? That is going to trap heat in our atmosphere, which can contribute to climate change. Right. And pollution is the other thing that we talked about with either just nutrient pollution from, say, like fertilizers running into our local water systems. This can cause algae blooms, which is going to really destroy the biodiversity of local watering systems. Right. So what you'll have is the nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizers running off into local watering bodies of water. Which will feed algae. So the algae population blooms like crazy, which creates this like green mat over the water, and it blocks the sunlight from everything else below it, right? So actually it's going to, everything below it is going to be completely blocked from sunlight and it starts to die, right? As well as the algae now, because it doesn't have enough nutrients to sustain this population growth. So those start to die off and they get to the bottom of the water. And then you have these decomposers that are breaking down all of this dead and dying material. And the decomposers use a lot of oxygen in order to perform cellular respiration to support their energy needs for all of this new decomposition that they're doing. So they're pulling the oxygen out of the water super, super quickly, which makes the water hypoxic, right? So lacking oxygen, which will then kill all of the other fish. So it's just this cascade of events of killing off everything very quickly. All right, the other one is biomagnification. Think like in our tuna. Magnesium, no. Why can't I think of it? Metal in tuna. Mercury, of course. I'm sure a lot of you were thinking it, right? So mercury is a metal that can run off from local industry and waste, factory waste it can run into the local waters, right? And as we move up the food chains, the concentration or the level of mercury increases as you move up the food chain to the point where there are toxic levels of mercury in larger fish like tuna. Right? Talked about that. All right, so that is the end of ecology. Other things that I just want to touch on at this point, some of the biotechnology tools that may come up, right? I have not seen PCR come up, but PCR, it would explain it, but PCR is a process to make lots and lots of DNA really quickly, all right? And you need to do PCR in order to do these gels, all right, where we're looking at DNA. Right? So these gel electrophoresis, it sorts DNA by their size, and you can compare DNA samples here. All right, so you can do these DNA comparisons. So the more similar the DNA is in these different lanes, the more closely related these samples are. All right, another thing.
Are you going to post these notes?
I have posted these notes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, they've been up. All right, CRISPR is a gene editing tool that may come up. All right, so you can edit your genes, kind of. All right, other things that may come up is designing experiments. All right, so the independent variable in an experiment is what you are changing. The dependent variable is what you are measuring. So if the experiment is testing different fertilizers on plant height, right, you can say the sentence that the plant height depends on the fertilizer. So plant height is the dependent, the fertilizer is the independent, right? So plant height depends on the fertilizer. The independent is what you're changing, the dependent is what you're measuring. Control group is your comparison, right? So you're going to use either no fertilizer or like Miracle Grow, where you know how it works as your control. It's this baseline, and then everything else is being kept constant. All right, so all the other factors for all of the groups have to be kept constant. All right, so base of soil, water, sunlight, stuff like that has to be kept constant. Right. You will be asked to interpret evidence. All right, so it frequently requires you to construct and interpret graphs based off of raw data. I don't know that you'll have to make a graph, but you'll have to interpret graphs. All right, so always look at the axes and the units for the axes. So if it's looking at population size over time, all right, so you can tell the relationship of population size over time. So make sure that you look at first the title, the axes, and then the relationship. All right, so here are some more advice about graphs and data tables. Right, you're trying to look at different trends that are being shown on the graph. Right, here's an example of that. Start with the basics. What kind of graph is it? Look at the title, look at the axes, and then try to determine the trend that it's telling you. Right, the 3 investigations that we did that they're not going to ask directly about it, but it may come up, is balancing act. We talked about homeostasis, all right, temperature control, lactose tolerance, all right, the mutation in the control region of the DNA allowed for the expression of lactase into adulthood, right? And then for the birds, where we're designing solutions to human impact, right? So we fluffed this one, right? So the whole idea was designing or engineering this screen that protected birds from bird death, right? Or death by flying into windows, right? On the last slide of this, there's a bunch of other resources going through previous exams. At this point, hopefully you've done that, right? This has been up, right? So up here, these are the 2 previous review sessions. More Regents practice questions. This is a whole kind of review book that I posted a while ago, or before, I think, one of the last days of school. Let's see, what else? Where did I put this? I must have put this somewhere. Well, I'll certainly post it now. I thought I had it up. All right, any questions for me? Tomorrow, be there at 8 o'clock. You'll be seated by 8:20 and you'll start before 8:30. After 2 hours, you can leave, but you don't have to. You can use all of the time, which is 3 hours. Everybody's taking it in the student center, all right? So you're gonna go to the cafeteria first and then they'll cycle you into the student center. My 2 Regents classes are sections 1 and 2, and then my AP sections is section 16. So 1 and 2 will be the first 2 that you see, and then 16 will be at the end. If you were there today, you may know this. People took global today.
Dr. Converso.
Yeah.
What formulas do we need to know for the Regents?
None.
No, just no formulas at all. That's
No,
it?
no, you don't need to know. You may be asked to do like a Punnett square, but no formulas.
Okay, like a small Punnett square, like a four. Just 4
Yes. Yeah. Just like comparing like heterozygous versus homozygous dominant or something like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Check out, I have two other review videos up if you missed them.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Parker, your hand's raised.
Dr. Verso, if you have extra time, can you go to a different room?
Yes, sorry, I was just about to say that. If you have an IEP or a 504, you have to take it in the course room. All right, you do not have a choice, even if you didn't take it all year long in in a separate location, you have to take it there. Your exam will not be in the student center, so you will be guided down to go to the course room if you have an IEP or 504. Yeah, and you have extra time. I mean, that's a long time, so I don't know, but use what time you need. Sienna?
Do you think there's going to be like a codon chart?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. Do you want me to go over that quick?
Yeah, can you? Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So you will be asked at some level to go from DNA to RNA and then to codon, and then amino acid. All right, so let's see if I can find an example. Right. So, perfect. And it may be in the context of mutations, which I think is what this is looking at here. All right, so let's see. So just write in the first 3. All right, so if you have DNA that the code is TTC, okay, you're going to transcribe that to mRNA. So T in mRNA binds with A, goes to A, T binds with A, and C binds with G, right? Now you have RNA, right? So now you have AAG RNA. And now you're going to use the RNA to find the amino acid. So it goes DNA to RNA to amino acid. Okay, so once you have the RNA, AAG, you can use the codon chart to figure out what amino acid that is. So you take the first letter, right, A, the second letter, A, and then the third letter, so AA, and the third letter is G, and you'll find that this specific amino acid is lysine, right? All of the codon charts look slightly different, but it's usually going to tell you. So first position, second position, third position, right? So A, G is lysine, right? It may ask you in the context of mutations, all right? So this is what this is looking at here. So if you have the sequence TTT, that will transcribe to AAA, right? And if we look on the codon chart for AAA, still lysine, right? So there is this thing called redundancy, where multiple amino acids or multiple codons code for the same amino acid for this reason. So this slight mutation is not changing the amino acid, which is good, right? But that's not always going to be the case. If we then have a mutation that goes from TTC to TCC, right? Now, instead of AAG, we're going to have AGG, And if we take AGG and go up to this codon chart, AGG, it is now arginine. All right. And remember, let's see, the only difference for RNA, DNA to RNA, is that there is no T. So if there's an A, it binds with a U instead of T.
Wait, what's the difference between a conservative and a non-conservative again? Oh, okay. I see how it is.
Yo, she don't like you, bro.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what I did.
Cool it, Grillo.
Sorry.
What's the difference between a conservative and a non-conservative? I wouldn't worry about those terms exactly, but a conservative a conservative mutation, they're not going to ask it on the regions, but it is something that we talked about, is that if the amino acid goes from a hydrophobic to a hydrophobic amino acid, it might not have a huge difference on the resulting protein, but if it goes from hydrophobic to hydrophilic, then it's going to make a big difference on the protein. I don't think it's going to ask that level of things.
All right, thank you.
Michael?
Do the 5 and 4 students have to go to the student center, or do we go right down to the chorus room?
You go right to the course. You all go into the cafeteria, and they kind of call you by section, pretty much, and then you'll kind of go the same way as the students going to the student center, but you'll split. So you'll go down the stairs instead of into the student center.
Okay.
Anything else? It is a long exam. I proctored the global, and I forgot how long it really is, 3 hours to be sitting there. So pace yourself. It should be about 15 minutes per cluster set. All right. So I would check out how many cluster sets, how many questions there are, just kind of flip through looking at things to try to pace yourself. Don't race to get done by 2 hours. That's not the goal. The goal is to be done by the 3 hour mark. Don't try to get out of there as fast as possible. You may skip something, and that's kind of the worst way to lose points, is to just like skip a multiple choice question. All right. However, it's a long test. So I suggest bringing water. You can have water by your side and just sipping it. All right. So they don't really want to let you go to the bathroom unless it's an emergency. So they will, but they don't really want to. So just like sipping water throughout it, and definitely eat something beforehand. Like, please eat something beforehand. Not something like crazy heavy that's going to make you feel sluggish, but like, have something beforehand, or else your brain is going to feel so tired by the end of it. So you want to keep yourself kind of sustained. Even just like, I don't know, like if you have like candy on your desk, like little Smarties or something like that may help. All right. When you go into the student center or the chorus room, all of your belongings are going to go into the bleacher area. You have like separate sections for each section. And everything's going to go there, except bring a pen. All right. So have multiple pens, please. Bring a pen and bring water. It's a long time. And a sweatshirt. It wasn't too cold, but you could be sitting in an area that gets a lot of breeze. So bring a sweatshirt and a highlighter. Anything you can highlight the passages. You can notate it as much as you want. All right. So you can write on the test booklet as much as you want. So I would just pen, not pencil, pen, and then highlighter. I did see that if you were asked to like draw something like a diagram, that you can use pencil. Right. So maybe it's worth bringing as well. Victoria?
Oh yeah, how many questions is the test like overall? Like, because
about 50 to 55.
Because I've looked at past ones, and like it's not just like set multiple choice, it's like multiple choice weaved into like short answers.
Yeah, it's these cluster sets. So it's looking like around 5 questions per cluster set and around 10 cluster sets. I know that's kind of not super good mentally to prepare for, but that's how it is.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
It's just short answer and multiple choice, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It may ask you to like make a diagram or something, and usually what they're just looking for is like you like pointing arrows to things. It
Oh,
doesn't
okay.
have to be like super intricate.
All right. Thank you. Don't be super intricate or be super intricate.
No, I wouldn't be super intricate. It's not looking for that kind of detail. Like it might, I don't know, it could ask you to like draw a food web or something like that, but I don't know.
All right. Thank you.
Oh wait, for the body systems, like how in depth? Like, do we just really need to know like what the functions are and like how they function in the body?
So with these cluster questions, it really is going to tell you a lot of information. It's going to give you some background about what they're talking about. I would know like the main idea of the respiratory system, bringing in oxygen, right? The circulatory system is the transport. The digestive system breaks down nutrients. It's really the main idea of each of the systems. I don't think that you need to memorize every individual part of the system. I think that's something that it will tell you in the cluster questions, right?
Okay, and like we don't need to know like a bunch of like the chemistry with the elements in like the equations, right? Like what's like other than like glucose and like the photosynthesis kind of equation.
Yeah, so knowing that I something that we talked a lot about was what makes something organic versus inorganic. So organic has carbon and hydrogen, right? So all of the macromolecules that we talk about in the body are organic macromolecules because they have carbon and hydrogen, like carbohydrates and lipids and proteins and nucleic acids are organic molecules.
Okay, do we need to know like how like carbohydrates and lipids like and proteins like they're full like
You don't need to know structure. You don't need to know structure.
how much like in depth do we need to know about them though? That's like
I don't think that you need to like go back to it really, Doria.
okay.
Get a good night's sleep. You don't want to be exhausted. Get a good night's sleep. There's not so much you can do at this point. I would just be you can be looking at notes or listening to videos, doing practice questions. But night before, we're pretty late now. Prioritize staying hydrated, getting good rest, maybe like listening to a review video or something like that, and eating a good breakfast in the morning. All right. All right. Great. a lot of thumbs up. All right. I think I'm going to call it. I will part to you too, Colin. I will answer emails. If you have an email, just I'll answer it. So that's all for now. All right. Good
Bye.
night, everybody. You got this, Victoria.
Are we sure? Because like we're starting to double check there.
You got this.
'Cause-
It's hold on, let me stop the recording.
oh yeah, that's